I used to spend hours deleting dialogue because it sounded wrong, and I couldn't figure out why. The words were correct, the characters were saying the right things at the right moments, but every time I read it back, it felt flat, like I was transcribing a meeting instead of writing a scene. And then I realized the problem wasn't what my characters were saying, it was that they were saying exactly what they meant every time with nothing underneath it. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. This video is about subtext, what it actually is, why it's so hard to write, and why getting the balance wrong in either direction kills a scene just as fast as bad prose. By the end of this video, you'll understand what's actually happening underneath good dialogue, why your characters might be saying too much or too little, and what I've started doing in my own drafts to make scenes actually come alive. Welcome everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Daniel, and this is the Story Renaissance. On the nose dialogue is when a character says exactly what they mean, exactly when they mean it, with nothing held back. It sounds like this: I'm angry at you because you never listened to me. Or, I'm scared that if I tell you the truth, you'll leave. Or, the reason I can't commit to this relationship is because my father left when I was 7. And the thing is, people do sometimes say things like that in therapy, in arguments that have gone on too long, in moments of genuine crisis. So it's not that on the nose dialogue is unrealistic in every context. The problem is that it removes all the work for the reader. When a character just tells you how they feel and why, there's nothing left to discover. Good dialogue almost never says the thing directly. It circles it. It approaches it and retreats. It says something else entirely while meaning something completely different. Good Will Hunting actually shows both sides of this in the same film, which is what makes it so useful to look at. The early therapy sessions between Will and Sean are almost entirely deflection. Will performing brilliance, cracking jokes, picking fights, saying everything except the true thing. He's doing it deliberately, consciously, because saying the true thing would cost him something he's not ready for. And then, toward the end of the film, in the "it's not your fault" scene, John says the direct thing, the on the nose thing, over and over, and it destroys Will completely. But here's why it works where it would normally fail: because the film earned it. Because we watched Will deflect for 2 hours. Because we know exactly what those words cost him to hear. On the nose dialogue can land when the scene has done enough work underneath it that the directness feels like a wall finally coming down rather than information being delivered. The difference isn't the words, it's everything that came before them. That's the thing about on the nose dialogue. It's not always wrong. It's wrong when it arrives without the tension that makes it mean something. And building that tension is exactly what we're talking about next. Subtext is the thing the scene is actually about, underneath what the characters are saying. It's two people arguing about the dishes when the scene is really about whether one of them still feels respected. It's a job interview scene that's really about whether the protagonist believes they deserve the thing they're trying to get. It's a conversation between an estranged father and son about the weather, about the drive, about nothing in particular. And underneath every line is 20 years of silence that neither of them knows how to break. The dialogue is the surface, the subtext is the current underneath it. And what the reader feels, what creates the sensation of being inside of a real human moment, is the gap between the two. Revolutionary Road does this better than almost anything I've read. Frank and April Wiegler are a couple who have built their entire marriage on the shared belief that they're different from everyone around them. Smarter, more alive, meant for something bigger than the suburban life they've somehow ended up in. The plan to move to Paris is the last version of that belief. And when the plan starts to collapse, the arguments they have are never really about Paris. They're about the mortgage and the timing and Frank's job offer and April's practicality. But what every single one of these arguments is actually about is this: who gave up first? Who is responsible for the fact that we are actually people we said we'd never become? Yates never has either of them say that. They don't need to. You feel it pressing against every line of conversation they have, like something trying to break through the floor. The gap between what they're arguing about and what they're really arguing about is where the whole novel lives, and he never once steps in to explain it. That's what subtext looks like when it's working. But here's where most writers stumble when they first understand this. Because the natural response is to go further, to bury everything. That creates a completely different problem. Click aside. If dialogue is one of the things that keeps your drafts feeling stuck, I run a community of writers called the Story Renaissance. We work through this kind of thing together every week. The link's in the description below. All right, back to it. Here's the thing nobody warns you about when you first learn about subtext. The overcorrection is just as deadly as the original problem. Once you understand that characters shouldn't say exactly what they mean, it's very tempting to swing hard in the other direction. Characters start speaking entirely in deflection. Every line is oblique, nothing is ever stated. The scene becomes this dense, elusive thing where nobody says anything clearly, and you're not sure what's happening or what anyone wants. I've written scenes like this. I thought I was writing subtext. I was actually just writing confusion. And there's a real difference. Subtext isn't characters who never reveal anything. It's characters who reveal things indirectly, through what they choose to talk about instead, through what they flinch away from, through the moments where the thing underneath almost breaks through the surface before they push it back down. The reader should be able to feel what's not being said. If they can't feel it at all, if the scene is so buried that nothing registers, you've gone too far in the other direction. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, either the play or the film, is the example I keep coming back to for this. Because Albee is working with extraordinarily dense, layered material, and somehow keeps it completely understandable the whole time. George and Martha spend the entire play attacking each other with viciousness that is almost theatrical. They're performing their cruelty, weaponizing their wit, saying things in front of guests that no real couple would say out loud. And yet you're never confused about what's happening underneath. Every barb that George lands about Martha's father is really about power and whose life this is. Every time Martha humiliates George in front of Nick and Honey, it's really about the version of George she thought she was getting when she married him versus the one she got. And the central secret they're carrying, the imaginary son, is so perfectly buried for most of the play that when it finally surfaces, it reframes everything you thought you understood about why they needed to hurt each other this much. Albee keeps the subtext legible by making sure you always understand what each character wants from the scene, even when what they're saying has nothing to do with it. The audience is always oriented. They just can't look away. That's the target. Not obscurity, legible tension. You want the reader to feel the current, even when they can't see it. So now you understand what subtext is and what it isn't. The question is, how do you actually get it onto the page? Because understanding it and writing it are very different things. So what does this look like in practice? How do you actually write subtext into a scene rather than just hoping it shows up? The thing that's helped me most is starting with what I call the real conversation, the one the characters can't have. Before I write a word of dialogue, I ask, what does each character actually want in this scene? Not what they're asking for out loud. What do they want that they won't say? What are they afraid of? What would they never admit? Once I have that, I write the surface conversation, the one they're actually having, and I let it be shaped by the pressure of the real one underneath. The surface conversation isn't random. It's chosen consciously or unconsciously by the characters as a way of circling what they can't say directly. The topic of the surface conversation is usually safe, or at least safer, but the emotional charge underneath bleeds through in how they respond. What do they fixate on? Where they get defensive? Where they suddenly go quiet? Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants is the most famous example of this because it does something almost impossible. It conducts an entire story about one of the most loaded decisions a person can face without ever naming it once. The whole thing is a conversation at a train station. A man and a woman waiting for a train, looking at hills, ordering drinks, talking about whether to try the beaded curtain. They never use the word abortion. They never directly name what they're deciding, but every single line is shaped by it. When the woman says the hills look like white elephants, and the man said he's never seen one, that's not small talk. That's the whole distance between them in a single exchange. When she says, once they take it away, you can never get it back, and he immediately changes the subject, you feel the pressure of what he can't acknowledge. When she finally says, would you please, 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 please just stop talking, you feel everything she's been holding back through this entire conversation crack through the surface just once before she pushes it back down. Hemingway doesn't explain any of it. He doesn't need to. The real conversation is so present underneath the surface one that you feel it in your chest, even though it's never been spoken out loud. The other thing I've started doing is reading my dialogue back and asking, where is the resistance? Real conversations have friction in them, moments where someone deflects, where an answer comes too fast, where someone changes the subject in a way that reveals exactly what they were trying to avoid. If my dialogue reads too smoothly, if everyone answers the question they're asked and then just moves on, that's usually a sign that the subtext isn't working yet. Real people don't answer the question they were asked. They answer the question they wish they'd been asked, or the one they're most afraid of, or they answer something else entirely and hope nobody notices. That resistance is where the scene lives. Here's what I couldn't understand about subtext, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize it. Subtext isn't a technique you apply to dialogue. It's a symptom of characters who have an interior life. When I was writing on-the-nose dialogue, I thought the problem was in the words. But the real problem was I didn't know my characters well enough to know what they couldn't say. I hadn't asked what they were ashamed of, what they were protecting, what they wanted so badly that they couldn't risk naming it out loud. So they just said everything, because I didn't know what they were hiding. When I started asking those questions first, before the scene, before the dialogue, before any of it, the subtext started appearing on its own. Not because I was cleverly withholding information, because the characters had something to withhold. The dialogue got better the moment the characters got more of an interior life. Not more complicated on the surface, richer underneath. That's the shift. It's not about what they say, it's about who they are when no one's watching. Write that clearly enough, and the subtext takes care of itself. If you're working on a scene right now where the dialogue keeps falling flat, where you've rewritten lines a dozen times and it still doesn't feel alive, I built a space for exactly that. It's called the Story Renaissance. It's a community of writers working through the hard parts of their projects, the scenes that won't click, the characters who won't talk, the drafts that are technically together but somehow still feel hollow. We do a weekly Write Together live stream where you can just show up and work, and we talk through this stuff. What's actually going wrong, what to try, how to find the thing underneath the thing. No pressure, no gurus, just writers who get it. The link's in the description and the pinned comment below. I'd love to have you there. Here's what I want you to try after this video. Take a dialogue scene you've been struggling with and ask 2 questions before you touch a single line. What does each character actually want in this scene? Not what they're saying they want, what they actually want. And what would they never say out loud? Write those answers down, then go back to the scene and see if the dialogue changes. It usually does. Now that you understand this, the next video you need to watch is this one I made about the 6 questions every story needs to be able to answer. Because great dialogue can only carry so much weight. If the foundation underneath it isn't solid, no amount of subtext is going to save the scene. The 2 videos go hand in hand. I'll see you there.